Welcome back to Parenting Unplugged. Today we're talking about how brain development shapes the way teens make decisions and what parents can do to help their kids make healthier choices. I'm joined by Dr. Heather Treat and Kayla Heiler, both from Endeavor Health Behavioral Health, to break down the science behind teenage behavior. To start, how does brain development influence the way teens behave and make decisions?
So we have two parts of the brain that we're going to focus on talking about. So one part of the brain is called the amygdala, which is responsible for our immediate reactions, including any fear or aggressive type behavior. And the other part of the brain that we're going to focus on is the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for reasoning and helps us think before we act. When we are talking about adolescents in particular, their decisions are more guided by the amygdala because our brain isn't fully developed until we're around 25 years old. So that explains why adolescents are more likely to act impulsively. They're more likely to engage in dangerous and risky behavior. They can more likely misinterpret social cues and emotions. They're more likely to get involved in fights compared to adults. And then they're also less likely to think before they act on their decisions. They're less likely to pause to consider consequences of their actions, and they are also less likely to change their dangerous or inappropriate behaviors.
And now we know why parents exist because they don't have their fully developing brains yet. So we really need to help them through it. So there's a few other things. So one of the other things that adolescents are going through a lot is synaptic pruning and myelination. It's a lot of words, but basically we'll talk about synaptic pruning for a moment. That really is just trimming like unused neural connections. So we're just getting rid of the things that aren't helpful. We're trying to make the brain more efficient. And then myelination strengthens the frequently used ones. And so myelination helps us get our brain to move quicker, again, more efficient. So because we're going through that, it really shapes our long-term brain wiring. And so it is really helpful for them to create good habits, coping skills, and learning patterns during these years. And it can have a lot of lasting effects. And so we want to help them become the fully functioning adult that you want to have. We don't want a failure to launch situation. We want them to be able to go into college or go into a job without not being able to manage it. So that's another part that they're going through. And then also, the brain's reward system is in overdrive. So the neurotransmitter dopamine, it really reinforces just pleasurable experiences, and it's just particularly active during adolescence. So again, like Kayla was saying, it makes exciting or risky experiences happen more frequently, but also it feels more rewarding to teens than it would to an adult. And so they're way more likely to chase these new sensations because the reward just literally feels stronger to them. So if you've ever, done something you did when you were a kid and you're like, yeah, it just wasn't the same. There's a reason for that. Our brain's reward system has shifted as we age. The other thing we like to mention here is video games, phones, social media, all electronic things. They are a provider of dopamine. With each new post they read or message they read, they get another wave of dopamine. And this can get really addictive for teenagers because not only because they are still developing their executive functioning, but also because their reward system is overreactive. It's actually making it more difficult for kids to be able to do that. So try not to set your kids up for failure. Try to make sure that you're monitoring how much time they're online. Do all of those pieces because that can also help with making it to where the rewards that they receive with dopamine is actually healthy.
So, if this is what's happening in the brain, what actually helps teenagers make healthy decisions?
So, there are three topics that we are going to focus on with helping teenagers make healthy decisions. So, one big component is having healthy adult role models in their life. And part of having healthy adult role models is having a validating environment where they can have a safe space to make mistakes and also a secure base to make mistakes. So that way they're willing to go to their parent if they do something that wasn't helpful and they're able to talk about it without trying to engage in sneaky behavior. And also, the other piece is having consistent emotion regulation, and mindfulness skills, which we will talk about in more detail. So, the main question that I want parents to just kind of think about in general is, since one of the biggest things that we talk about with teenagers making healthy decisions is having healthy adult role models in their life, is what do you want your teenager to learn from you? Because you are a role model in their life, whether you realize it or not.
The good news is you don't have to be the only healthy adult role model. You can have other people come in. You can have an aunt or an uncle, grandparent. These other people have a really profound impact on these kids. And so try not to feel like you're alone. And teachers, all sorts of people in your life can be healthy adult role models. In order to be a healthy role model, there's a really good way to do that is to create a validating environment in your home. We call these the 3 Bs. So be an effective communicator, be non-judgmental, and be consistent. So another part of actively listening is being able to reflect back their thoughts without judgment. So one of the first things that a therapist will learn when they're in graduate school is how to actively listen and reflect. So reflecting is when you listen and then try to summarize what that person said in a more concise way that can almost help them learn what they feel even better because of the way that you're responding to them. The other great thing about reflecting is it helps you understand better. They can also clarify because if you respond and you reflect to them, and then they say, no, 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 that's not what I meant, because they can actually clarify and you can reflect again so that it's clear that you are on the same page. You also want to try to do this without judgment, especially at first. Just right now, you're just summarizing what's been said. So what you'll hear a therapist say sometimes is, so what I hear you saying is dot, 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 right? That's reflection. So really helping us summarize, help us clarify, and it just really gives them the option to correct you, which I think is really needed.
Another key component to be an effective communicator is observe how your adolescent is feeling in the moment and look for words that would accurately describe their feelings. So you can just kind of explain how they are portraying their body language, or you can even ask them. I'm going to use my 4-year-old as an example again. If he is more escalated on his behavior, I will typically ask him, are you feeling tired or hungry? Because that's usually what escalates his behavior.
Yeah.
So, and that usually gives me the answer because he understands those key components. So I'm more likely to get a more effective response from him if I give it specific examples of how he's feeling. Another thing we have to be mindful of is how we are describing emotions, because when we are kind of getting into this power struggle with adolescence, we have to be careful of how we say things. So an example that we want to stay away from is, why do you have such an attitude? Because that could create more conflict in the situation with that conversation. So rather just give those descriptive emotion words rather than giving that subjective language.
Yeah, it just puts them on the defense immediately, and then they just give up, they shut down. So,
Yes.
all right, I wish I could ask that question of my 3 dogs. I wish I could ask them what they were feeling when they were getting escalated, because I have no idea, half the time.
Yeah.
One of them's a puppy. Okay, anyways. All right, so then moving on. So, the last thing that we really want to talk about. This one of the most important bullet points for being an effective communicator. When the teenager is at a higher level of emotion, do not try to talk them out of it. You want to validate how they're feeling. And then if you think they're in a very high range of emotion, just help them do something healthy and distracting until they calm down, because you really can't expect them to be able to think straight when they're in that high range of an emotion. That's the mistake our parents often make in our program, is they are trying to problem solve, which is lovely, but they're trying to problem solve when our patients are like in crisis or when they are having that really high level of emotion, and that just doesn't always turn out well because they can't hear you. They're almost not there anymore. You kind of want to think about it as fight, flight, or freeze. So when they get really anxious or really angry and distressed, their brain, all the energy has gone to like their arms and legs so they can run or fight. So that part of their brain's just not working. And what we talked about before with their brain development is they also just don't have the executive functioning to be able to control those impulses as easily anyways. And so, really being mindful of trying not to talk about it or problem solve when they're in that crisis range doesn't mean that you can't help them. You want to validate and then help them use skills or distract them. Again, anything healthy and distracting is a crisis skill, in our opinion. So, that's kind of the best way to handle it when you're doing that.
And another thing we have seen with parents too, with kids experiencing more intense emotions, is it can definitely be uncomfortable seeing our kids be in crisis. And it is very important to let them be uncomfortable so that way they are building up tolerance with those emotions rather than trying to make those emotions go away or make them feel more comfortable because they're not going to learn to tolerate those emotions in the future when other stressors come up in life.
On top of the fact that we know you're uncomfortable, you actually might be in crisis. And so it's hard not to want to just help them get rid of it immediately. It's really hard, but it is very important. And just monitor your discomfort too and try not to put that on the child, the teenager. So the next B is be non-judgmental. All right, so this one is difficult. We can't expect you just to not have judgments. That's really not a thing. It's that you're going to have judgments, totally normal. It's part of the way your brain's designed. It's just we don't need to verbalize all of our judgments. And not only that, but once we notice judgments, we don't have to get caught up in them. We can, we take what's helpful and we let go of what's unhelpful. So just really being mindful of not using the unhelpful judgments because they will take in those things. They will really hold tight to those. They'll remember it 2 years later. You want to be very careful about how you approach that.
It's very important to let the adolescents make mistakes without having strong reactions from their parents and also helping them to learn do something different next time. So they should be allowed to make mistakes. They can have natural consequences for those mistakes. But the key point here is to not have strong reactions and to be a healthy role model by showing how you have your own distress tolerance in that moment as well.
It doesn't mean you have to be like okay with what they did. It just means you're not yelling and screaming, you're not lecturing for long periods of time, you're being firm and you're being direct, but you're not they're not going to want to come to you when they make a mistake. They're not going to want to come to you. Let's just say your 14-year-old daughter goes to a party and they realize like this isn't the best healthy place for me to be. You want them to be able to call you, and if you have a lot of strong reactions when they make mistakes, they're not going to do that. You're not going to be the one they call. And so be the person you want them to come to when they make a mistake.
It's also important to take time to calm yourself down as a parent before making decisions, because if parents are in crisis when making decisions about consequences, we can tend to have consequences be more severe than what they need to be. So, an example for that is telling your adolescent that they are grounded for a week because they failed a test. So rather, we can have short-term consequences to have them correct that behavior, and then they can earn those privileges back once they correct that behavior, rather than having our decisions be based on our own crisis.
Yeah. And it's a hard one. We're coming back to a lot about not, making sure that you take breaks, that you calm down, because, parenting isn't just about how you talk to your child and everything else. It's also about you being actually feeling healthy, not just acting like a healthy role model, but being a healthy role model and figuring that piece out. So it really is important to just make sure that you're taking your breaks when you need to, because that's going to show them a lot. They're going to learn that from you. They're going to learn to take breaks. They're going to learn to practice skills, all of those pieces if you do that. So it's just really important to keep that in mind. So the next B is be consistent. And so this last one is really important because if you are a consistent human, you end up being the one they want to come to. They know that you're going to follow through on what you say you're going to do. It's really important. So One of the ways to be consistent too, though, is to make sure that you have consistent boundaries, that you're showing that you care, that you're being specific about what your boundaries are, and that you're being consistent with those boundaries.
Another important thing to be consistent on is positive reinforcement. So, rewarding and shaping even the smallest behaviors, which can be hard for parents, but at the same time, we have to learn to meet the adolescents where they are at. So, I'm going to use my 4-year-old as an example again. He tends to struggle to follow directions the first time they are given, and it takes lots of redirection before he follows that task. So, in that situation, I would give him all the praise that I can whenever he follows directions the first time that they are given because it's such a rare occasion, and that's the only way it's going to shape that behavior in the long term.
Yes, and positive reinforcement is just always the best way to go when all of the research with learning theory and behaviorism say that positive reinforcement is our number one way to do it.
Mhm.
I'm going to let you, because I already said that part. So I'm going to let you go again because I already said that be consistent as a human
Oh,
thing.
yes. Okay.
Sorry.
So another thing to keep in mind for being consistent with is limiting attention to unhelpful behaviors. And going back to the example that I gave with positive reinforcement, we want to focus more on giving praise and more attention to the helpful behaviors that we want to see more often and limiting our attention to those unhelpful behaviors. Not saying that we have to ignore those behaviors altogether. We can still put in natural consequences and boundaries to show them to do something different with their behaviors in the future. But again, we're not engaging in lecturing or yelling or giving extra attention for the unhelpful behavior because we could accidentally reinforce that behavior to happen again.
Yeah. So the idea here is that any type of attention you give to a behavior, that behavior will increase. So if you give attention to behavior, it increases. And then if you limit attention to behavior, you don't give much attention to it at all, it decreases. And so that's why, giving a lot of attention to helpful behaviors is the best way to go. And also limiting attention to unhelpful behaviors. And that's one of the mistakes our parents makes too, is that they're really desperately trying to help with the problems that are having. But then what ends up happening is they're giving a lot of attention to the unhelpful behaviors, so they're increasing. And we get it. And so we do, what we do try to help people come up with plans to make sure that kids have consequences for their behaviors. But if we're frequently coming at them, it's going to keep happening. If I give my husband a kiss on the cheek for doing the dishes every time, like he'll probably keep doing the dishes. But if I yell at him for not doing the dishes, he's going to keep not doing the dishes. And so you want to give attention to those helpful things and give the least amount of attention possible to the unhelpful things. Another thing with being consistent is really trying not to enable anything, particularly anxiety. It can often be, you can see your kids suffering. They're not acting disrespectfully, but they just look like scared. If we call them out of school because they don't want to go to school and we enable that behavior, we actually are increasing the likelihood that they're going to keep not going. If I have anxiety and I have a panic attack and I get to go home from school every time, or I don't have to go to school every time, I'm going to keep having panic attacks, not on purpose, but that's the way the brain works and the way it's designed, is that it's going to do what it can to get the most attention from others, as well as whatever that validating environment and reinforcement is giving them. And so just making sure we don't enable as well. So those are the 3 B's.
What about emotion regulation? How can parents help their teens build these skills?
So just to clarify, like, what emotion regulation is. Emotion regulation has a lot of different skills kind of involved, but it's about being able to observe and describe emotions, which is very hard for kids to learn and for people to do, and even as adults, like, we often haven't been asked to do that often. So that's important. Another part of it is having balance in life, and so increasing your positive experiences and making sure that, work and play is balanced, which in, we're coming from the anxiety and OCD program, we have a lot of overachievers that come in where there will be the entire week they don't have like more than, a minute to really do something fun. And so we talk a lot about balance. And then another part of emotion regulation is taking care of your body. We all know if a toddler is hungry or tired, they're not going to have the best behavior. Well, it doesn't change as you age. We all get hangry. We all have difficulties when we don't sleep. So this is all emotion regulation skills. There's a lot of different pieces there, but what we're really trying to do is regulate emotions. So we're going to walk through each one a little bit and talk about it. So the first one I mentioned was observe and describe. So with this one, it's describing like body sensations you're having, so that you can understand better what emotion you're experiencing. So I know that when I have butterflies in my stomach, I'm either anxious or excited, right? Like before we started this podcast, I had butterflies in my stomach because I was anxious and excited, right? So I know that that's the emotion I'm experiencing based on the body sensation I'm having. And so being able to observe and describe even my body sensations can help me name the emotion. And it can just feel really validating, for you to actually help them with that too. So that's why a big part of this is you teaching emotion regulation skills and mindfulness skills. The next part is increasing positive experiences and having balance in life. So with this piece, I kind of think of it as, pennies in the piggy bank. Each time you have a difficult situation, you take a penny out of the bank, you're using that penny to help you get through, right? So every time something happens, you spend another penny. Well, if we don't put pennies in the bank, then we're not going to have enough change to spend when we actually really need it. And so each time you do something, like when I get home and I light candles when I get home, which is a very pleasant experience for me, like I'm putting pennies in my bank. When I choose to be mindful, when I'm like washing my hands throughout the day, being really mindful during that 20 seconds, like it really helps me kind of reset. When I have air freshener in my car or whatever it is, even these really small things can really add positive experiences into our lives. And so this, of course, includes, going to watching your favorite movie or going to see a movie. But
I feel like I practiced this today because we've been very busy at work,
yeah,
like nonstop. And I brought a lunch with me, but I didn't eat my lunch because I decided to order food because I wanted something to look forward to because it was a very difficult week and I wanted to break up something or have something to look forward to throughout the day before recording the podcast. That was something I was looking forward to increase positive experiences
Yes.
after having a stressful day.
Perfect example. Or wearing funny socks or your favorite shirt but it can also be longer things and spending time with people. Like all of these things are going to put pennies in your bank. All of these things are going to put pennies in your bank. So make sure that we have balance in life and that we're adding to that. The last one is taking care of your body. And so we actually have an acronym for this called STRONG. And we're going to kind of walk through it step by step. But oh man, these are some of the most underutilized skills that we have. And I think people make the assumption that they're doing them sometimes and they're not really doing them. Or, they think they can live without it. They're like, oh yeah, I really only need 6 hours of sleep and I'm fine. And it's like, well, maybe not. A teenager needs 8 to 10 hours of sleep. So we're going to talk about sleep hygiene and a few other things as we go. So just a moment. Do you want to do sleep hygiene? I don't think I feel like we didn't decide which one's which. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So before going over each component in detail, STRONG stands for sleep hygiene, treat physical illnesses, resist mood-altering substances, and having routine and structure, once a day, nutrition, and get exercise. So the first thing that we're going to talk about in more detail is sleep hygiene. So for adolescents in particular, they need 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night. We encourage them to not nap throughout the day so that it doesn't affect their sleep at night, as well as napping could also be used as an avoidance tactic.
Definitely.
We also encourage them to limit screens right before bed in replacing screen time with non-stimulating activities. So, some examples of that could be reading a book before bed, or coloring on paper, doing a word search, or dot to dot, anything that's on paper that does not involve screens that can help wind their brain down to have their mind show that they're prepared for bedtime.
Yes. So having the routine, but then also remembering just the environment. So making sure their room is dark and cold. I mean, of course, they can have the nightlight or whatever it might be, but having TVs in their room is usually not the best idea. If you do have TVs in their room, I would recommend like having the remote control with you because they will not be able to resist turning the TV on with if they wake up in the middle of the night, and you're basically kind of setting them up for failure when we do that. So just be mindful of what kind of habits they're doing with the TV in their rooms. Then also, you want to kind of mimic the light like outside to what you're inside your house. So like in the morning, all my overhead lights are on. When I get home from work, I've got my lamps on, but maybe not the overhead lights. I mean, nowadays it's dark basically 15 minutes after I get home, but and then like I'll have the candles lit like I talked about earlier, and then as the day progresses, like I'm closing the blinds and everything else so that my brain kind of knows this is nighttime because we don't want to prevent that release of melatonin, which is what helps us sleep. And if we are looking at screens or we're looking at the sun, it makes the brain think that it's daytime. And so it will prevent that release of melatonin. So 90 minutes before bed, as the research says, is to turn off electronics, but we kind of know it's unrealistic. So we always kind of try to aim for at least 30 minutes. Also, not eating big meals right before bed. You can have a snack, have a little small snack would be good. We don't want people to be hungry, but we don't want to have big snacks. And then also exercise can be activating. And so if you getting your exercise in is a really important part of sleep hygiene actually, but we want to make sure that we're doing it 90 minutes before bed or earlier. So those are a lot of the sleep hygiene things. The next one is the
Can I add
tea.
in one more?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Another key component for sleep hygiene, kind of going back to how the phones and social media and technology is very addicting in the adolescent world. We encourage parents to have a designated spot, like in like the parents' room or like a common area where the adolescents can keep their phone. So that way they don't have the urge to look at their phone in the middle of the night because, again, they don't have that impulse control at their age to be able to keep that phone away. They're going to have the urge to look at it, and that could also affect their sleep throughout the night as well.
You're going to have the thought that they should just be able to do it, but they really, based on what we talked about with the brain and the way it works, like they really can't. It's really just too difficult for them. So I do recommend too, like not having it in like the kitchen or something like that because they will go get it. So I usually recommend having it in your bedroom or something like that so that you're supervising. So our next part of the acronym is the T in strong. So it's treating physical illnesses. And so with this one, we just want to be mindful of that. If we have a cold, if it's not getting better after like 3 to 5 days, make sure we go to the doctor, that we take medications as prescribed, if they say 10 days on an antibiotic, it's 10 days on the antibiotic, guys. If we we want to get a lot of rest, we want to get a lot of fluids. This is the time you can nap is when you're physically ill. And then I feel like there's one more. Oh, I know what it is. Sorry. And then there's also the importance of when you're taking like over the counter medication, making sure that you're paying attention to like pay attention to the instructions, make sure we're not overdoing the over the counter medications. If we start to take those too much, we would probably need to check in with our doctor.
The other part to take care of our body is to resist mood altering substances. So the main thing for adolescents is resisting any alcohol, nicotine, illegal substances. Energy drinks is another big one for the adolescents. Things that we want to be aware of to limit is any other type of caffeine, any sugar intake. We want to limit that, especially before bedtime, so that way it doesn't affect our sleep, because that can help us stay more regulated throughout the day. And also having a specific routine and structure, which we will talk about more detail, but having a consistent wake up time and bedtime and just having that routine throughout the day sets them up for success and they know what to expect and they have that flow throughout the day to know what their responsibilities are. So there's no surprises.
Yeah, and then that creates that secure base too, where you have a foundation, you have a plan, you know what's going on. There's a lot less anxiety when there's routine. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean we don't want spontaneity and positive experiences, but we just if you have that routine and you're basing your life on that, then it's easier to have you're more regulated emotionally when you do have a difficult day or something happens.
Mhm.
So that's why routine is so important too. It's the second R that we've kind of added in this moment. The O in strong is once a day. And this one is about increasing those positive experiences and having balance. So we've talked a little bit more about that already. But the part where we're saying like once a day, it's like, please just at least once a day, make sure that we're getting to something that makes us feel like life is meaningful, makes us feel alive, makes us feel positive about the day.
The next part that we're going to focus on to take care of our body is the N in strong, which stands for nutrition. So we talked to the adolescents about having two options of how many meals we recommend throughout the day. So the first option is to have three regular sized meals throughout the day. If we're struggling with appetite because of anxiety or any other type of stressors, the other option is to have five smaller meals throughout the day. So we're still having consistent meal times. It's just smaller portions broken up more frequently.
And some people's bodies just respond better to doing like five snacks versus
Hmm.
or five, small meals instead of three big meals. Man, they love to argue about this one though. None of them want to eat breakfast. Every teenager I talk to, they're like, I don't eat breakfast. I'm like, oh gosh. And of course my brain goes back to elementary school when they were always like, make sure that on test days they eat breakfast, but it is true, we need to get that protein in the morning, and that's a big part of nutrition too, is getting protein in the morning is going to help with focus and concentration and really prevent more of that brain fog.
And also making sure that we're staying hydrated throughout the day too. Kind of going back to like the energy drinks and sugar intake, a lot of times what we've seen from the adolescents is not really preferring water and they prefer
It's
like
an
soda.
understand.
They prefer soda or energy drinks in replace of water because it doesn't taste good. So, one way that we have helped the adolescents drink more water is adding like Crystal Light packets to their water. So that way there's some flavor in it, but it's still a healthier option than
Mhm.
soda or energy drinks.
Yeah. And with water too, you want to think about half your body weight in ounces is the amount of water we should be taking in each day.
Mhm.
So if we're 150 pounds, we need at least 75 ounces of water. And if we're doing a lot of activity or, sports, things like that, we're going to need more water than that. But that's kind of an aim, that's a amount that you can aim for. So the next one in strong, the last one is get exercise. So what we really try to aim for here is like 60 minutes of activity every day. So when I say activity, I don't necessarily mean that they're on, an elliptical for 60 minutes. I just mean we need to be moving our body. So if we go to the mall for an hour, like that's 60 minutes of
Mm.
activity. If we, walk the dogs 3 times a day for 15 minutes, that's 45 minutes of activity. Like we're moving our body. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, full blown, workout, but we do want to get that activity in. Now, of course, we do want to get the workouts on into, I'm sorry. We do want to get the workouts in too. So making sure that we're getting strength oriented exercises, but also cardio in there. We just really recommend finding something you love to do when it comes to exercise. If you're trying to force yourself to do things that you just kind of hate, you're just making yourself miserable. We don't want to do that. The other thing about exercise is making it convenient, rewarding yourself for when you do it. So for me, I have a rowing machine, like one of those cheap ones off Amazon. It works really well. And I sometimes I won't even get like out of my work clothes and I'll just go straight to the rowing machine because it's if I start to do anything else at home, I'm not going to do it. So I've just learned get on the rowing machine as soon as I get home, and I only get to watch like this TV show that I'm really interested in when I'm rowing. So It's very slow going, but like 3 times a week for 20 minutes, I get to watch the show, and that can really reward me. So it's a really good reward and a way for me to keep moving, even though I really don't want to, so most of the
Mhm.
time. So that is get exercise.
A good way to make strong happen, which is the acronym that we just went over, that we just talked about in detail, is to have a consistent routine. So, some examples that we reference on how we can have a routine is when we wake up, just getting dressed and eating breakfast before starting other tasks, also making our bed. So that way we're set up for success throughout the day because we're in regular clothes. We're not walking out the door in the clothes that we slept in, which I feel like sometimes adolescents tend to do.
Me too.
And they don't eat breakfast. So I feel like those two things are very important to feel more successful throughout the day and also feel more motivated as well. I'm creating a daily routine with a variety of activities. It could be helpful to create a list so that way we can check things off as we go. It could help us feel more accomplished when we check things off our list, and having a visual list could be helpful to remember everything that we need to do for part of our routine as well. And kind of going back to the increasing positive experiences that we were talking about earlier for how to incorporate emotion regulation, that is important to implement that into the routine because that's the only way we can increase those positive experiences consistently is by including those in our daily routine in that list that we have. So that way we are holding ourselves more accountable to
Yeah.
complete those.
Like it needs to be on your calendar that
Mhm.
I'm going to do this thing. It can't be that the positive experiences are what we add in when we have free time. It needs to be things that we actually choose to do every day and have in our calendar. Another thing we can do is just taking time to talk about your day. This is a good way to help, the adolescents learn how to observe and describe their emotions. Meal times can be a great time for this. And so it also just shows that you care. So make this is where you'll use those active listening skills and reflection skills. So just giving them that opportunity and then also sharing about your day and helping them learn that, you're not perfect either and how to look at that. Again, another thing with routine is just balancing work and play. And on lastly for this piece, we're just talking about like spend some time outdoors when you can. I mean, I know a lot of us will live in Illinois and it's not easy to be outside sometimes, but it really does make a huge difference.
Mhm.
Your brain responds differently when you're outside. When you're looking at a horizon, it calms itself down. And so it's just really important to get outside and also just getting vitamin D from the sun.
You mentioned mindfulness as an important skill. Can you explain what mindfulness is and it, how to practice it?
Mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non judgmentally. So, there's two different types of mindfulness that we will talk about. The first one is formal mindfulness practice, where we would do a specific mindfulness skill. The example that we have is called four square breathing. So that would be breathing in for 4 seconds, holding our breath for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, holding our breath for 4 seconds, and repeating 4 times. So those mindfulness skills can help us practice our mind focusing more on the present moment versus the past or future. And that also helps us practice living mindfully, which is the ultimate goal. So, some examples of how we can live mindfully on a daily basis is to put phones or any type of distractions away during mealtime. So that way we're having very active conversations and we're not getting distracted by other distractions. And we're having our undivided attention during those conversations. Another key component to living mindfully is focusing on one thing at a time. I feel like, especially in today's world, we are very focused on trying to multitask, which isn't necessarily a thing, even though we think it is. It's more of switching our attention back and forth very, very quickly between two different tasks, and that we think that we're good at it as human beings, but it tends to slow us down because we do an actual activity in group that shows the kids how multitasking takes longer than actually focusing on one thing at a time. And there's just scientific research behind it, how it really does slow us down. So by focusing on one thing at a time, this lessens the opportunity to make mistakes or miss something important, and we're just focusing our whole attention into that one activity that we need to get done rather than focusing our attention back and forth between multiple things.
Mhm.
Another important component to keep in mind is focusing our mind on the present moment. As human beings, this isn't going to be something that is going to happen automatically because our mind is going to get distracted by our thoughts, whether it's past or future thinking. So, whenever we notice ourselves getting caught up in thoughts that aren't helpful in that specific moment, we can work on training our brain to focus back on what's going on right now. And the more consistent we are with doing that, we're building up that muscle memory in our mind or in our brain to focus on the present moment versus the past or future. And if we notice ourselves getting caught up in past or future thinking, practicing on letting those thoughts go, not getting hooked up on those thoughts or feeding into those thoughts, because that is what's going to make our emotions more escalated if we are feeding into those thoughts.
So yeah, and like Kayla was saying, with four square breathing, like that's a more guided thing. It's a more formal type of practice. And there's so many options, right? You can go on you can go on YouTube and get so many different options for guided meditations. And they're really, really great. We want to do those things but they're a way to practice to living life mindfully, being able to have dinner with your kids and focus on them entirely, being able to remember their smiles, being able to have a more rich experience, a more meaningful experience. That's what living mindfully is about. And so sometimes when the kids are like, I hate mindfulness, because that happens a lot,
Mhm.
we're like, okay, then let's just do some practicing of living life mindfully. And so this can be anything from, like I said, focusing on a conversation to, focusing on washing your hands without doing anything else, or brushing your teeth without doing anything else. Having a full cup of tea when you get home from work before you do anything else, and you're not distracted by the TV at the same time. So it's just living life mindfully and experiencing life in a more rich way. So mindfulness also helps you with observing and describing emotions. You really can't do any of the other skills unless you know how to be mindful. And so this is a really good way to start. Mindfulness is just that important. When we do skills, we have a different theme for each day, and Monday's is mindfulness, because we really can't teach a lot of the other skills until they've learned how to be more mindful.
Mhm.
So, and then Kayla and I were going through all of this stuff, and we realized there's a good skill that combines kind of everything that we learned today into one. And so it is a dialectical behavior therapy skill called STOP. And it's an acronym again, of course. We love our acronyms. So this one is STOP. And this one is basically a way to set yourself up for practicing a skill. And so a lot of times people are like, okay, yeah, so I'm supposed to practice skills, but like, how do I do it? Like, this is the answer to that. It's like this teaches you what to do to kind of know how to react next. So the first step in STOP is to stop. So stopping the urge to act immediately. So all these big emotions that adolescents experience are going to tell them to act without thinking. And so if we can teach them how to do the stop skill, it can help them really resist those. It can really help them control their impulses more. Because remember, if their fight, flight, or freeze is activated and their amygdala and limbic system is overactive at this age, it's going to be very hard to do this. And so it's really important to teach it. So that's the first step. Stop the urge to act immediately.
The second step of stop is to take a step back. So, getting unstuck from what is going on in our mind and practice a breathing exercise to calm our body and focus on the present moment. So this goes back to the example of four-square breathing that we spoke about a few minutes ago, because when we're focusing on a breathing technique that is our anchor to the present moment, because our breath is always there in this moment right now. So that's why that's a good one to start with to help calm those physical sensations down, and then just practicing mindfulness and emotion regulation skills in general to kind of get unstuck from what is going on in our mind.
Yes. So that's the T. Take a step back. And then the next one is O, observe what is going on inside and outside of your body. So we talked about observing and describing your emotions beforehand. This is what we're talking about, looking at our body sensations, paying attention to our environment and what's happening in the moment so that we can gather all the information we need in order to make a helpful decision moving forward.
And the last component of stop is P, proceed mindfully. So some questions that we can ask ourselves to proceed mindfully in an effective way is, what actions are in line with my values? So an example of that could be if we are getting frustrated with our adolescents' choices, then we can kind of ask ourselves, is our action of yelling and lecturing in line with my values, or is the action of talking calmly to them, trying to teach them effectively to make a better decision in the future, is that more in line with my values? And then what choices make the situation better or worse? So it's essentially kind of weighing the pros and cons in our mind. What choices is going to help the situation de-escalate in the future and for the rest of the day versus escalating things even further? And then obviously, in order to proceed mindfully, we need to practice skills as needed. So that way we can stay lower on our emotions and we're not escalating to the more intense emotions as often or as quickly.
And now you have some skills that you can actually do to proceed mindfully. So that's stop. So that is the way we would just wanted to wrap things up so that you guys understood how to combine all of it together. And that way you would remember it more clearly.
Heather and Kayla, thank you for walking us through how the teenage brain works and giving us practical tools like the stop skill, the 3Bs, and emotion regulation strategies. Remember, creating a validating environment at home means being an effective communicator, being non-judgmental, and being consistent. And your role as a healthy adult model matters more than you might realize. For more episodes and resources to support your child's mental health, click the link in the description to visit our website. Thanks again. We'll see you next month.